my topic for the presentation today is the challenge of menstrual shame in South Asian cultures. And I'm looking at it from a phenomenological point of view, but I'm also not restricting my analysis here to phenomenology, but I'm extending it to ontology because I'm seeing that the problem when it comes to the body, and especially because we're talking about women and their body and we're talking about menstruation, I think the problem that I see is not merely social or cultural, it is ontological. So this is my abstract. I didn't prepare a PowerPoint presentation, but you may please refer to the abstract here because I know that there are certain terms that I'm going to use. So this is for reference for that. So there are, of course, different ways in which we can talk about the body, and we do, biological and physiological on one hand, and then social, political, cultural on the other hand. And academically, at least, we see that certain interest in the body grew largely in the 20th century, 19th and 20th century, with especially in Europe, when phenomenology or the movement of phenomenology was becoming a thing, and also because of developments like the feminist movement, then various technological interventions in the field of medicine, biology, and so on. So as a result of these multiple factors, and especially when we look at the works of phenomenologists like Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, Simone de Beauvoir, we see that the body was now intelligent, and the intellect was now incarnated, which was a very significant departure from the otherwise very Cartesian ways of thinking. Now, before I go over to the topic, which is menstrual shame here, I actually want to begin with also saying a couple of points about why, in the context of South Asian cultures, I would want to use, these or refer to these European phenomenological thinkers, why I'm not choosing to pick a methodology from, let's say, the Indian systems of thought. It's not that the Indian philosophical systems, for instance, haven't had a discourse on body. There is, for example, in systems like Sankhya, one of the two ontological realities is Prakriti or matter. And the other one is Purush, which means consciousness. Prakriti being feminine and Purush being masculine. However, interestingly, Prakriti or matter here is the active agent, and consciousness or Purush is passive. Then in schools like Buddhism and Yoga, we see that body is essential to not only meditation, but also to mindful actions. But the problem was that, a methodology of this kind would remain largely limited if I want to address social and cultural issues, because these systems were largely, predominantly, and eventually soteriological in nature. So there was an inherent transcendence or transcendental aspect in them, which I feel that they may not be sufficient enough to address these kind of issues. Having said that, of course, there's a lot of work going on right now where we are trying to see, okay, what can we do with these systems and these ideas to address, the very everyday problems that, especially, related to gender, etc. Rather, I find that the experience of caste and untouchability in the Indian subcontinent can be seen, at least in the modern history, to have brought up the idea of lived experience of the body. Reason being, untouchability in context of caste was not merely an idea that somebody could not be touched or should not be touched. Untouchability in the context of caste is literal. Like, you really create, a space between that, okay, that there's a physical distance created that, one caste is not going to intermingle physically in any way. So it was, there were, discourses coming from, I would want to name, women like Savitribai Phule, who's considered to be the first woman educator of India. Then Tarabai Shinde, who's also considered to have, who's probably written the first feminist poem on gender and caste. So I see that there's a lot of discourse on the body in the Indian subcontinent context or the South Asian context, emerging from the discourses on caste and gender intersection, rather than coming from the systems of thought, the huge systems of thought. Moving on to the topic for the day, which is menstrual shame. So the South Asian beliefs and practices around menstruation are quite varied and also contrary. For instance, on one hand, we find these, ceremonious celebrations of menstruation when a person gets their first period. For example, as you can see here also, for example, Manjal Nirattu Visa, okay, in Tamil Nadu. Then in Sri Lanka, there is Pupunita Nirattu Visa. Then there is in Assam, Ambubachi Mela, which is actually the celebration of the menstrual cycle of goddess Kamakhya. So it's very wonderful to see that there is on one hand, there is this. And then on the other hand, we see practices like Chopadi in Nepal, where the menstruator is supposed to live away from the community while they are menstruating. So there is that. And of course, there are other kind of practices and beliefs also. And besides these, some very specific rituals, myths, etc. There is a general discomfort around menstruation, and which creeps into one's everyday life and experience. For example, exclusion of the menstruator from places of worship. Okay, so you're not supposed to be present in places of worship, so which becomes an act of exclusion. And then some very funny things that take place. For example, at this transaction at a pharmacy store, when you're buying these menstrual hygiene products, so they'll wrap it in a newspaper or a black polythene and give it to you. Okay, so the very act of hiding away the the phenomenon of menstruation as well as the menstruator. The funny part is that you're actually making it too explicit. So it doesn't really invisibilize the experience. It rather, visibilizes it in a manner that actually harms the dignity of the person and shames them. So this brings me to the other part of my presentation. So I'm talking about menstruation now, about shame. So shame can be understood as an uncomfortable feeling or guilt that somebody can have because of their own behavior or maybe of somebody else's. Then another way of understanding shame would be loss of honor and dignity, and I'm interested in the latter one. So Sandra Lee Batke, in her Femininity and Domination, um, she refers to Sartre in a manner where she disagrees with him. When in Sartre's phenomenological ontology framework, we find that Sartre says that in the seer-seen relationship, a person is objectified when the other sees, when I'm seen by the other. Bhakti says that actually not necessarily, because you don't always need an external audience to shame you. You have an internal audience to shame you. And especially this holds true for very gendered experiences where you may not, and Sartre makes the problem of shame very ontological in nature, which by the way is all right. But the limitation is that this shame is not experienced by all of us in the same manner. We are experiencing it differently. So making it very, very gendered in nature. Then Luna Dolzell, in her The Body and Shame, says, and I quote, body shame plays a central role in female embodiment, and that this can have negative consequences for women in terms of their agency, transcendence, and subjectivity. And unquote. So another example here would be, and in context of what I just read out, would be, for example, Shalini Vora talks about how at the intersection of being economically disadvantaged situation, as well as being a menstruator alongside, this creates a very new kind of experience and a very new kind of challenge. So homelessness intersected with, being a menstruator. Now, this is again something that, ontologies of, for example, Sartre, or when Descartes talks about mind-body dualism, these kind of ontologies, or even for that matter, if I refer to ontologies that we find in the Indian philosophical systems, they probably cannot really cater to these kind of very unique kind of challenges and problems that experience of menstruation have. So that, and then Luna Dolzel talks about two kinds of shame: acute body shame and chronic body shame. So acute body shame is to do with, the more behavioral aspect of the body. So the way I present myself, okay, my body comportment, my bodily management. And chronic body shame has, is more permanent in nature. For instance, to do with the color of my skin, or to do with my weight, to do with my bodily functions, etc. So when it comes to menstruation, I am interested in chronic body shame, although I do understand that the two cannot be taken as completely distinct from one another. But I do think that there is some perennial chronic aspect to, being a menstruator. So, yeah, for example, another example would be the embarrassment the menstruator may have in using and disposing of the menstrual product after they have used it outside of one's physical space, or even sometimes within one's physical space. For instance, if you're living in sharing a small space, physical space, with 3 other members in your family or 4 other members in your family, and if you are the only one who menstruates, so the shame that you physically carry with yourself in every act of, every time you get up and you have to dispose of this product of menstrual hygiene. So this I see as more chronic in nature. At the same time, every act being acute body shaming as well. Now, then I want to make a proposition at the end of my presentation here, that because the problem that I see here, especially in the South Asian context, is ontological in nature and not merely social and cultural, I want to probably point at or list 3 ontological frameworks, which, by the way, I do think remain very insufficient and inadequate to address these kind of problems. And then I will probably try to convey something that I think can be, some kind of, I wouldn't say solution, but some kind of giving us an opportunity to look for solutions. First one being, of course, the Cartesian dualism of Descartes. And we know, I think, enough already about why it is very inadequate, to solve any of these problems. Rather, it is one of the reasons why we have problems of, why we look at mind as something and body, defining body too much in terms of what it is not, rather than seeing the body for what it is. The other one is, of course, Sartre, who does bring body to the forefront of experience, does an excellent job in terms of making us understand intersubjective relations, but doesn't help us. What do we do, when it comes to problems like menstrual shame? Then I want to refer to one of the Indian systems of thought called Advait Vedant, where the ontological reality is non-dual, okay, and it is called Brahman. So the ontological reality in Advait Vedant is, Advait means non-dual, and this reality is Brahman. So there is, in the Hindu epic Mahabharata, there is a debate between a woman mendicant, Sulbha, and Janaka, who's a king. And Sulbha hears that Janaka has attained enlightenment. So Sulbha, being the curious mind and someone really interested in understanding how this happens, goes and meets Janaka. And Janaka, questions Sulbha on things like, how can such a beautiful woman be a mendicant? Okay, so shames her again, shames her in a very physical manner. Okay, then asks her, who has sent you here? Why are, because he doesn't think that it could be a woman's agency to choose to go and have this debate with a man. So Ruth Vanita in The Self is Not Gendered very beautifully brings out this debate and also presents an analysis of this. So even though when we do have, in the Indian philosophical context or in the Indian epics also, we do find instances of very strong feminist voices. again, I come to the same point that, okay, ontology, that keeps bothering me, okay, that it is something ontological, where we need to work. So, for example, there are many in the South Asian societies at the moment also, there are many things, there are many programs running, there are many support programs that are going on in India, Bhutan, Pakistan, where there are facilities, wash facilities that are being incorporated in the schools, providing changing rooms for menstruators, preventing them from any kind of missing school or dropping out, etc. And there are awareness programs teaching boys about menstruation and so on. And as much as these material and concrete ways of dealing with the status quo are urgent, essential for a better life of the menstruator, I feel that a new ontology can rearrange the structure and foundations of life as we know it and as we live it. So, coming to the conclusion and what I'm proposing here, so since I'm arguing that the problem is ontological, uh, in a Cartesian objective transcendental account, there is, if I may say, uh, it is quite inevitable that they will, they will offer, an essentialist notion of the body. So any system which is reductive in nature, which emphasizes a lot on understanding the body in an objective manner, including the scientific way of understanding the body, they may remain insufficient in addressing the very complex nature in which the biology is intertwined with the social, cultural, socio-economic aspects. So an objective account, I'm not sure if it can really, help us like that. Then what may help, however, is a non-reductive and a non-essentialist ontology, which can create opportunities for a more liberal concept of the body, where the emphasis is on the lived aspect rather than the essence of being. I see Merleau-Ponty's ontology of flesh, as he was still working on in his manuscript, in the visible and the invisible, as uh, as an eligible avenue to reconceptualize the body with anonymity, because this flesh of Merleau-Ponty was anonymous, ambiguous, general. Now, and when I say this, I know I'm aware that there is a very strong feminist critique, as the previous speaker also pointed out, of Merleau-Ponty's ontology of flesh, precisely for the reasons of anonymity and generality. And in no way I'm presenting the defense of Merleau-Ponty, in the light of these critiques. Since my point is ontological, all I'm saying is, and this may be a very abstract idea at the moment at least, that since ontology is prior to, politics of gender, race, caste, I think that if we change ontology, we make a rearrangement here, the structures we build on that is going to change as well, because we've seen that happening. We've seen what what Descartes' mind and body dualism has done. Has led to binaries of all sorts, and we're still trying to get our way with it. So that said, my point is that even when Simone de Beauvoir talks about ambiguities, I'm banking upon the idea of ambiguity, because I think that when something is ambiguous, uh, it leaves you with a lot of opportunity to be whatever you want to be, to choose the kind of life you would want to, and accommodate more diversity. And it doesn't have to be defined in any way what kind of a life a person, based on their gender, caste, or anything for that matter, has to look like. So I would just end with saying that, at least in the South Asian cultures, what I'm seeing and what I'm very hopeful for, considering the kind of work that is happening at the moment in philosophy and in feminist writing, I think a new ontological alternative should be on its way. And because that, I think, will help in resolving many of the issues, including the problem of menstrual shame, because menstrual shame is the main challenge, okay, in the South Asian cultures, besides, the material issues that can be dealt with. But shame is not something which will really leave us until again, I have to say, until we change the ontology. Thank you very much.